Hello and welcome to this seminar on children's rights in international law. Today we have the great pleasure to have Rosa Maria Ortiz here with us today. She is the Inter-American Rapporteur on the rights of the child. My name is Ylva Hartmann and I work as a human rights expert at the Swedish Foundation for Human Rights. And we are together with PLAN Sweden organizing this event. So if you want to tweet from this event, we have a hashtag MR-Fonden here. As provocatively announced in the invitation, Sweden is beginning to lose ground as being at the forefront protecting human and children's rights, I meant to say. For instance, Swedish children does not have a formal complaint mechanism, particularly for violations of children's rights. The Swedish Ombudsman for Children does not have the possibility to receive complaints, and neither does the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child when it comes to complaints against the Swedish state, because Sweden has not ratified the third optional protocol to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, while 10 other countries has done this, and the optional protocol and the complaint procedure is now in force. Instead of continuing with more examples of this kind of critiques that has been addressed to Sweden when it comes to children's rights, because there are quite a few from the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, I will give the floor to Rosa Maria Ortiz, that has been working with these questions in the setting of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and children's rights has taken a prominent position in the Inter-American system, and Rosa Maria is going to tell us about this. She will make her presentation for more or less half an hour. Afterwards we will have a short panel discussion with Hanna Gerdes, human rights lawyer at the Swedish Foundation for Human Rights, and Karin Ödqvist, who is a child rights advisor at PLAN Sweden. And afterwards we will have an open question and answer session with you. So Rosa Maria Ortiz, she has been the rapporteur on the rights of the children of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in 2012, with a mandate until 2016. She has been Vice President of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, and advisor on human rights and cultural diversity for the Paraguayan Presidency National Secretariat of Culture. She is founder and member of several human rights organizations. In 2010, she received the award Peter Benenson for the defense of human rights from the Paraguay section of Amnesty International. And she has been working with ecumenical organizations in favor of political prisoners in her country during the dictatorship in Paraguay. I now leave the floor to you for the introduction of an impressive curricula.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having the opportunity, for participating in this dialogue with you. When you become old, I will be 62. Your curriculum increases only because of many years. I want to say, first of all, that I feel very familiar when I'm here in Sweden. I learned about human rights and about children's rights of you. I work as educadora de calle with street children since 82 to 90. Before the convention, I met Save the Children, Rada Bargan, in that moment. And what I learned from the Convention on the Right of the Child, I learned with Save the Children, I must say. That's why Sweden for me was always very close, even when Paraguay is so far away from Sweden. And I realized that sometimes I idealize. I'm sorry, my English. When I was selling the children's rights to local governments and local authorities, I always talk about Sweden as an example, and I hope it is like what I said. But it was very useful to talk about Sweden and the importance of children's rights in Sweden. I've been here invited by the Rada Ombudsman. No, Barnen Ombudsman. I've been 1 month studying the Convention on the Right of the Child here, and so I like very much Sweden people for all of that. And I thank you to the Swedish Foundation for Human Rights for this opportunity, and also the presence of all of you. It's a pleasure for me to share with you some experiences I'm having as member of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. As you know, the Inter-American system on human rights exists since 1958. Perhaps you don't know, but it is like that. So much and a lot of time before the convention, the Commission on Human Rights developed standards of children's rights. And with the convention, it helped a lot that the court, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, launched an opinión consultiva, advisory opinion on child rights, which says that for the interpretation of the Declaration and the American Convention on Human Rights, you have to consider all the treaties, the international treaties on human rights and on children's rights. That means that when we work, we have all these as a parameter.
Parameters.
Thank you. I would like to share with you some things that we do from the Commission, and we are going to also refer to what Ylva has told about participation. First of all, to all of you who know something about Latin America and Caribe, you know that in the 90s, at the moment when the convention was adopted by the United Nations, the dictatorships in Latin America were concluding, and the most principal armed conflicts in Central America were concluding. That means that, excluding Colombia, all the region adopted democracy as an ideal and as a goal. And the human rights became good words after many years of repression on everything that has to do with human rights. I remember in my country, Paraguay, where we had 35 years of dictatorship, the chief of the police in his desk had two weapons. One was called human rights, and another was called constitution. And if any prisoner talk about that, and you want human rights, you want constitution. You couldn't use those words. I remember being educadora de calle, street teacher. We published a book with our experiences, and we had to read twice to see if we had used democracy, liberty, human rights. We had to invent ways of talking about reality in the correct way, politically correct way. Well, not correct, but that moment, not to go to jail. Well, so in the 90s, after the convention, the whole region was ready to receive all the principles of human rights for children. And Brazil had a very important role. Brazil, during the time of the transit to democracy, with their campaign for Direitas Já, for democracy, and with the pedagogist Paulo Freire, who talked about participation and protagonismo, educación liberadora. So everybody was ready to adopt all the principles, including the right to be heard, because that right we needed also the adults, and if adults needed, why not children? So it was quite easy to pass the convention, to be adopted as quickly as possible. In 2 years, most of the countries adopted the convention. But not only adopted this convention, adopted many conventions. In my country, adopted 8 conventions without sin digerir. Digestion.
Digesting it.
That means that adopted was important, because you can digest later, no? And see what you have adopted, and change your legislation, your institutions, your policies, your practices, your budget, and the way you work. I see, and perhaps I'm wrong, you will tell me, that Europe, including Sweden and United States, of course, Canada, adopted the child rights conventions for the other countries to change. And perhaps I'm wrong, I'm just saying what I feel, being 8 years in the Committee on the Right of the Child, that to talk about the right to be heard, it was something that had 10 years, 20 years in Latin America, and in Europe still was difficult to talk about that. And many other child rights. So I understand now that the difficulties that you deal in Sweden, I understand a little, but I can more or less understand when I hear that Sweden has not adopted their national legislation to the convention. And when I hear the person from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs say, it's because we don't think that we can change our legislation. But this is what all the other countries do. Adopt the convention and then change the legislation. Because these are the principles, and then the law comes to adopt these principles. And it is a surprise, as it is a surprise for everybody, that the United States had not ratified the Child Rights Convention. And I happened to be 1 month ago visiting adolescents in prison with adults, and judged and condemned and imprisoned with as adults. And I explained to the authorities, how can this happen if USAID is teaching all the region how to change the code, the penal code, how to create the juvenile justice system, how to respect human rights. And if you do that with your cooperation, why don't you do it in your own country? It's something like that I would like to say for Sweden, salvando las diferencias, saving the differences. Of course, saving the differences, but we learned from Sweden a lot. on children's rights. We changed our legislation. We adopted the convention. We created new institutions, policies, budgets, local governance, national systems at 3 levels, local, state, national, with participation of civil society and national organizations or public ministries, to talk about and to create, elaborate, and adopt policies, legislations, budget, participation of children. And then I hear here that most of these things still are a problem here in Sweden. And what I mentioned to the person from ASDI, SIDA, and the person from the Foreign Affairs Minister is that it's important to take care of this. If you teach that for other countries and you pay for them to change, and why don't you do the same in your own country? And it's not me who said that, it says the Committee on the Rights of the Child. I was there when Sweden came. But anyway, this doesn't recognize the importance of the cooperation of Sweden in other countries, in other regions, especially in terms of human rights. And human rights has to do with democracy and also has to do with business. If you want to make business in other countries, it's good for you if they have a democratic system, if the human rights are respected. Well, I want to talk to you about the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights that before and after the convention was protecting the children's rights in the region. During the dictatorship and during the armed conflicts, the cases that arrived to the system were of killing of children, not only children, but in terms of children, disappearance, torture, imprisonment of children, and also the right to identity. It was a problem, inclusive the situation of Argentine with disappeared people and children of those disappeared people having been given by illegal adoptions with the substitution of their own identity, created the necessity to work on this right, which was not enough developed, because the right to identity, the two elements of the right to identity that were name and nationality. And in Argentine, the civil society, the mother and grandmothers of May Square developed with the help of scientists and psychologists the third element and brought to the convention, and the convention adopted. And you can see in Article 7 and 8 of the Convention on the Right of the Child, these three elements: name, nationality, and family links. If you need your name, not a name, your family, not a family. And only when it's not possible to live with your family, welcome other families. But first of all, you have to ensure what? This that is so easy to say, after 25 years, still is a problem in all over the world. And you can see the problem of many children living in institutions, which is until now the first option when there is a problem in a family, an institution. When there is a problem in the school, an institution. If you commit a crime, an institution. So when I arrived to the Inter-American Commission, I found this third report about violence against children, because the Commission wanted to work very close with Marta Santos Pais in order to address this problem, violence against children. And this book was this part, Situation of Children in Institutions. The first report was about corporal punishment, the second about juvenile justice, the third about children in institutions. But I said, it's not enough to repeat what ¿cómo se dice? Las directrices?
Standards?
The standards for alternative care already said. If we don't want children in institutions, what do we have to do? To strengthen families and communities. Because you cannot say, close the institution. Take the children out to where? Because the bottleneck, cuello de botella, the bottleneck of the alternative care is the lack of programs in the community to help the parents to educate, grow their own children, and to help the community to have the alternatives to help the family do that. And until now, the cooperation arrived to a country, children rights, home. A home for poor children, without the child rights perspective. So, I decided to prepare the first part of this, talking about the right of the child to a family, putting an end to the institutionalization of children in the Americas. So we arrive here to the moment to speak about the economic, social, and cultural rights for children. Which are the obligations, which are the standards that oblige state to do seriously what they have to do. Because if we discuss the convention, we know that the convention was not adopted in order only to protect those children with problems. Because we were doing that, good or bad, but we were already doing that. If we needed a new treaty on human rights of children, was because we needed to change this only perspective and to give the prevention the best attention of the states through public policies, through program, through strengthening of the community, of the families, and protecting all children's rights, and especially changing the institutionality, the way institutions function. It's not only el patronato, the one institution for all problems of children. Because if you think in countries in Latin America, 47% of the population is less of 18 years old. How can one institution take care of all their rights? It's all the states organized and coordinated by a coordination body with political power to convoke and dialogue with all the ministries, because there is no one institution in the public sphere that has nothing to do with children's rights. Even economic ministers, they have to understand budget. In what sense? For instance, just in my country, the one person in charge of the ministry of economists say, no, I won't give money for adoption because you have only made 7 adoptions in 1 year. Because it's the last resort. The other needs money also, not only to make adoptions, it's also to prevent adoption. Adoption is welcome when it's needed. So these things need an organization of the state. And that's why general observation number 5 explained very well from the Committee on the Rights of the Child how the state must be organized to this new perspective of children as subjects of rights. And this is what we continue doing from the Inter-American Commission, trying to put in practice what the committee says, what the convention says, because the Inter-American system is closer to the states, as the European system is closer for you to deal with these problems. The same thing happened with the Inter-American Commission and Inter-American Court. The states are more used to deal with this system because the system is always there pushing them to apply, and to repair if they have violated, and with recommendations, with standards. And we have different tools more than the periodic review, which are perfect, fantastic, and very useful for us to put in practice through us. What do we do in the Commission? We receive from children and from NGOs, and lately we receive from some progressive states in human rights their good experiences to share. We receive hearings, we prepare hearings which are public, and you can see in the web page all the thematics that we have had. 2 weeks per year we devote to hearings. In each session we receive more than 60 hearings, and we adopt the hearings that represent the most important problems or the new problems. For instance, we have learned a lot in a hearing about LGBTI, the intersex, the people who are born with 2 sexes, and what they feel, what they want, what they expect, what their rights should be, and how to put that in words as standards. To wait, to hear for them, not to go to the surgery immediately, but wait until they decide what identity they want to preserve and how, and all these things. Next session, we had another hearing and said, intersex, and I said, but again, we have just learned, but it was from the perspective ancestral. What's that? And we learned that in many indigenous culture, the people born with 2 sexes are received as a gift, and they normally become religious leaders, because they have 2 spirits that guide them. And so they wanted us to know that this exists, and this perspective exists. So it's an opportunity to learn for the Commission, to know how to deal with the problem when they come to us. And it's also important for the states to listen, because when we receive a hearing, a petitioner that want to tell us something, we invite the states, and the state must give some answers. They just cannot say, no, that's not true, or we do a lot. so that we can make a seguimiento, following up of that initial agreement on these issues. It's so important, something so simple to do, because you say, but why these people don't speak in Paraguay or Uruguay instead of coming to Washington to listen each other? But they don't. It's not easy to speak with the authorities. They need another authority to make them speak and make agreements, and we follow the agreements. Another tool, and the children participate, and we are learning step by step how to participate, how to protect them in this right, because it's so important to listen to them, because when they explain things are much easier to understand and to solve. And for them it's also nice that when things are so heavy in their own country, they can go to another place, that it's a new hope for them, that you can continue fight for your rights. And they learn also. And they also go to the committee in Geneva, and the committee is also learning how to do. And we protect them. For instance, we had in March one about juvenile justice, and they discussed, because the organization of children's rights, niños, niñas y adolescentes organizados en la región, in the region, with the internet and Skype and many other tools that I don't know, they discuss the things, and they make proposals, and they make announcements, and they write to the commission, to the rapporteur, and this is what is happening, please do something. Well, sometimes it's difficult because you don't have so much power to do everything they ask. But we do our best. For instance, if we have enough information, we make a press release. 3 or 4 days ago, we made a press release on the killing of children in Honduras. How many children have been killed in the last years? 2 examples of horrible killing of children by the Mara, because they didn't want to be recruited by the Mara. So they were killed. They were 5, 8, 10 years old. And 2 adolescents in jail, killed by fighting of Maras inside. But it was the responsibility of the state. So we make the press release and remember the states, the standards. That if you have adolescents in the institution, you have double responsibility. One, because they are children and they need special protection. And second, because you are responsible for their lives if you have them in an institution. And these things to the states don't like, of course, to be publicly denounced by the Commission. So we always have to deal with the states and the victims. But we are to defend the victims and to protect us from the state, because the states also have a power on us. No? Muy tarde.
No, you can end your listening.
And so I only talked about hearing, I talked about press release. We also have a function in Article 41 of the American Convention to ask for information to the state in any moment about anything that bothers us, worries us. This is something that the universal system don't have, but the Inter-American system has. And sometimes the fact that the Commission is asking for some issue make the difference. and they act as they should do. What? The other tool are the reports. The reports are like the general comments of the committee. The interpretation and the standards of human rights on different issues. We made this as a support for all the campaign we are having to stop sending children into institutions. That means that we must work for the strengthening of the family. We must work at the local level, because only when the family and the community protect their children, they are really protected. We cannot only blame against the states for policies and not strengthening their own families and their own communities, because the narcotraficantes recruit children there in the public spaces, in the gate of the school, and the population need to understand where the risks are to protect their children. And this is something that we cannot wait for the state only to do, but empower the society.
I think I have to, sorry, I have to interrupt you there. We don't have so much time, and Rosa Maria has to leave at 1 o'clock also.
I prepared that. I only spoke about it.
We will also have the opportunity to pose questions to you in a while. You can please stay here also.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to hear the progress that can be made on a regional level and how that fits into the international level, also with the UN system, and also how important it really is to get the real participation of children when we're talking about children's rights. We will now have some short reactions from Hanna Gerdes and Karin Ödqvist. Karin Ödqvist is a child rights advisor and human rights lawyer at PLAN Sweden, and has been working with these questions, children's rights questions in the field and here in Sweden also. And Hanna, my colleague, has been working with human rights advocacy work in Europe and in Sweden extensively, and also is the author of a book called Barnrättsseminariet, Children's Rights, that you can purchase after the conference if you want. So please, Hanna and Karin, come up to the podium. And what I would like to hear, starting with Karin, is a little bit of the reactions on what we can learn from the American experience, and also how we in Sweden can strengthen. Well, I think the Swedish part of the question would be to Hanna afterwards, how we in Sweden can strengthen children's rights. But I leave the floor to you, Karin.
Thank you. Well, I would first like to thank Rosa Maria for her experiences from working in both in the committee but also in the Latin American context. And I think that one of your points, the points you made, that children's rights are not only one pointed issue, but we have to take a holistic perspective to children's rights. I think at all levels, at local level, at national level, state level, but also with the regional and international level. I think that's something that definitely we here in Sweden can learn as well. I think we have to make use more of international law or regional law in our work here in Sweden, both the government but also civil society organizations. And with the rights of children, I think that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is not used as much as it could be used here in Sweden. Although it's not per se law in Sweden, it's ratified by Sweden, it can be used in development of policies, and in the political dialogues that Sweden has at international level, but also at Swedish level, and in national courts. I think that's something that we can push as civil society organizations to make Sweden make use of the convention, because it has so many things we can push to strengthen children's rights, make use of the general comments, the recommendations from the states in order to get a more holistic approach to children's rights. I think also that we have to see to all the obligations and rights in the convention here in Sweden, that Sweden does not only have an obligation to protect and promote fulfill children's rights in Sweden, but it also has an international obligation to look in a wider perspective and make sure that other states also implement, like you were saying, but most importantly also seeing themselves as implementing, but seeing other states to do so, and also support other states through international cooperation for the fulfillment of children's rights.
If you let me, I want to make a reparation. I said Sweden pay for the state to change the legislation. It was my bad English. It's not that they pay the parliament to change the legislation. Please. Thank you.
Yeah, and in terms of Sweden's role as a promoter of children's rights internationally, I would really like to recapture what Ylva said in the beginning, the fact that Sweden has a very good reputation internationally of a defender of children's rights. And people are very often surprised when you actually tell people what the situation is like today in Sweden, both internationally but also in national policies. I mean, Sweden was one of the countries that initiated and promoted the convention, spoke out very loud on the importance of banning corporal punishment. It was a forefront runner in that question, and also has been an advocate for the protection against violence on children. But however, I don't see that this is on the political agenda today in Geneva, in the UN, and neither at the national level. And I think that's something that we definitely need to alert the greater stage and tell Sweden that we can't really live on our own merits that we created 25 years ago. We have to come with something new and live with the change that's coming. And I think a great example of that is specifically the question of the ratification of the third optional protocol, where Sweden is, everyone is very surprised, including myself, that Sweden has not really, is very passive and very resistant, ever from the beginning when it was developed and created and presented, thinking that this is not something that we want to engage in. This is not something that is important for children's rights in Sweden. But I find it very difficult to see that how can Sweden be a promoter for children's rights internationally if they themselves have not ratified the optional protocol, making it not really walking the talk and being the promoter that they have been and should be. So I think by not ratifying, they lose their reputation internationally, but also give serious effects for children's rights here in Sweden. And I think there would actually be a good way of promoting children's rights, giving children's rights access to remedies at international level, also making them obliged to look at the national level. What is the situation like today? Where can children go to have their rights fulfilled? And the Barnombudsman being the only ombudsman who doesn't have a complaints mechanism for children. Children have to go to other ombudsmen where they're not really seen, where there are specific needs, they don't have any experts who can see what are the needs of children and how can they get fulfilled. So I think with this optional protocol they can, if nothing is provided in Sweden, at least they can see the international perspective, and the committee can help Sweden and other countries to interpret the convention in a much better way, because it's not a court. It's not that Sweden will be fined for not fulfilling children's rights. It's a way of giving recommendations and jurisprudence on specific issues that are difficult to interpret for children's rights. Another issue that I think needs to be highlighted when it comes to the credibility of Sweden in the international arena is the lack of the general child rights perspective in Swedish development cooperation. I mean, Sweden has an obligation in the convention to also promote and support internationally. And that is also losing ground. For the upcoming review now for Sweden at the committee in Geneva, their review in January, we, together with Save the Children, did an assessment to try to look at how Sweden actually fulfilled their obligation under Article 4 when it comes to international obligations. We started looking at the webpage of Sida and UD to see what has Sweden done in the latest 5-6 years on children's rights, and the web page is not updated since 2009. So it gave us an idea that I think we need to do some work and to see what it's actually been doing. And the results from this assessment, looking at the policies and result strategies, the allocation of funds and so on, it was actually alarming if it's coming from a country who says to be a promoter for children's rights. It started off quite good, where Sweden in 2001 launched a specific government communication, barnrättsskrivelse, child rights perspective in development cooperation, where they had a 10-point program where they would actually have a directive to mainstream child rights in all activities and recognizing children as rights holders. This was in 2001. Today, it's not been followed up systematically. They did a review in 2005 where they said they still need to push this issue. And when we did the review, it looked at the decision today. There's actually no staff member at SIDA who is dedicated to working with children's rights. There is no formal focal point at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which we see today in the meetings, that it was difficult to find people. Who do we invite? Because there's no one actually taking the responsibility for the overall perspective. I mean, I know there are people working with specific children's rights issues, but there's no one who's taking the overall child rights perspective. We also saw there were no proper statistics on how much was funded for children in development cooperation, which makes it difficult to see how many resources are allocated and if it's been decreasing or increasing. Yeah. They're also neither doing child impact assessments, which the committee has over and over again said that that's a very important tool and method to see how the child rights perspective is integrated, not only in development cooperation, but in other issues when it comes to children's rights. So I think this gave us an idea of how the reputation is falling.
Just a short question on that to Karin. Do you as PLAN Sweden, do you feel that in your field work that the role of Sweden is back in a backlash in a sense towards your partners and in the field?
We have the unique opportunity that we get our money is not tied specifically to any geographical areas or to children's rights specifically, but we choose to work with those funds when it comes to Swedish support. But the links before with the embassies and with the bilateral cooperation was much easier to see before. But now it's more that we're in certain countries working through civil society, but our counterpart, the Swedish embassy, is not at all at the forefront that it was before, which makes it difficult to follow up, but also gives a lot of evidence to see that the result of this less focus actually gives huge results and effects for children all over the world. I'm not going to talk longer, but I just want to round up with saying that I was just informed yesterday that Sweden, together with Mexico, is hosting the anniversary of the convention, 25th anniversary for the convention at the General Assembly at UN. So I think this is a great opportunity, and hope that Sweden will actually recapture its good reputation, and we can actually give some good recommendations of what Sweden should be doing in that event.
Thank you, Karin, for this. Hanna, could you proceed with good lessons from American experience that we can take in Sweden?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to speak just a little bit about what we can do in Sweden actually to strengthen children's rights as well. I'm not going to say things you've already said because we know about the optional protocol, and we also know about the fact of incorporating the convention, which is actually a very, very important thing. And we do have 6 parties now in Parliament out of 8 that actually say they want to do this. So I mean, we are hopefully on the brink of doing that. From the Swedish Foundation point of view, from a human rights perspective, broadly, it's not only about the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but it's also about incorporating SEDAV and about our core conventions, because that would actually create a very strong human rights protective for children, since children are protected by all core conventions. So I think we should really, that is a very important human rights perspective, not because now we speak about children broadly, but I mean, we haven't had the chance to talk, when we talked about institutions, about children with disability, for example, but I mean, there is so much things to actually focus on here. So, but one thing that I would like to stress right now that I think we should do as organizations, waiting for the government and the state to get their acts together, so to speak. I want to look a little bit on the legal part. It's actually that even though the Convention on the Rights of the Child is not Swedish legislation, that does not mean that we cannot use it, like you said, in Swedish courts. And this is something that sometimes is misunderstood, and something that I really, really would like to stress and ask organizations and human rights lawyers to start doing much more. Because the problem is that the courts will very seldom ex officio use the international law. That means they won't take the international law and say, now we're going to interpret this. But if you use international law when you go to court, sometimes you can actually force the courts to do that. And we do have some judgments just recent, like a couple of months ago, from our Supreme Court, when they actually looked at the convention and used it. And so my point being, we can, as civil society organizations, use strategic litigation using law as a tool to actually change policies of this country. And I really want to stress that, because I think that's actually perhaps one of the most important things that I think we should be actually doing. So that's number one. And then what we can learn from the Inter-American. I mean, there is so much we can learn, actually. But once again, I want to focus on one thing, and that's, again, the legal system. Because one thing that I also always have thought about that we underestimate a lot in Europe is the symbolic value of different remedies. Human rights litigation serves two purposes usually. One aim is, of course, to uphold the law, and in every certain case give reparation to a family or to a child that has been that human rights have been violated. But the other thing is also to prevent future violations, right? To change policy. And sometimes assessing the monetary value of a crime it's very difficult, because how do you compensate a family where the child has been murdered or sexually violated? How can you put that into money? That's quite hard. And many victims of severe human rights violations that I've met during the years, they've always said that when it comes to reconciliation, when it comes to the really important part, actually it's not always the monetarily remedies that are the most important, but actually other kind of remedies. And that is something that we seldom use in the European system. The European Court of Human Rights, through its judgments, it can declare that human rights have been violated, and it can decide that Sweden, for example, should pay damages, but it can never nullify and change a law, so to speak. And in the Inter-American system, and this is something I've been so impressed by and I really want to study more, is the fact that they very often use other kind of economic, not economic compensation, but other kind of symbolic values. For example, the court has asked in its judgment countries to set up trust funds, to name a school after the victims, to apologize in newspapers, to publicly acknowledge and honor the victims, etc. And just as a brief, a couple of weeks ago, me and Jenny, we were in South Africa, and we visited an organization called Kulumani, which is a victims organization for people who had families or themselves were victims of apartheid, and they have 80,000 members. And one thing we discussed a lot is because they've closed, all the litigation processes have been closed down, so there's no way today to get economical compensation. But what they actually focused on was not primarily the money issue. They were talking to us about, why don't we have a museum actually showing, and why don't the government apologize for this? Why don't we get a reconciliation? So I think recognition. Yeah, recognition, exactly. And sometimes the money, I just want to say an example. Last week, the Roma case in Sweden, where the police has registered Roma families and Roma children. So then they decided that they were going to get a compensation. It's 5,000 crowns. I don't know if you had the chance to read it, but it's $800. Yeah.
No, I'm just thinking,
it's very small. And even though there was, on one hand, this was a compensation to big groups, on one hand, that legally is quite unusual. On the other hand, that was really a slap in the face, many people felt because it was such a small sum. So I really think that, coming back to the main question, if we should learn something from American system, is something I really value and I would like to learn more about, is actually the way you work with these other kind of remedies and compensations, because I think they are extremely important when it comes to human rights violations of children, but also other human rights violations. So, thank you.
Thank you, Hanna. It's impressive to hear about the the moral reparation that can be done in the Inter-American system, but this is also presupposes that they have a different mandate than the European
exactly.
Court. So
that we can push as well within the
Yes. So now we can take some questions from the audience. Yes, we can. If you state your name and if you're representing an organization, that would be splendid.
My name is Louis. I come from Central Africa. It's very colony. I present association Burundi diaspora och för svenska Stockholm. Your speech appels while the pupils and the children have a very bad situation in Africa. What will be your contribution to prevent the kidnapping of the pupils which began in Africa, such as in Nigeria? Today it is in Nigeria, tomorrow it will be in the other country. So I want to know what will be your contribution to prevent that situation.
Thank you for that question. I think, Rosa Maria, you can mention also the important work that you, as the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, has together with the African Union and the African Commission on Peoples and Human Rights in that sense.
Don't you want other questions?
If there are...
I'm Rodrika from the Swedish Foundation for Human Rights. Thank you very much for your presentation and interventions, very interesting. I wanted to ask you about the fact that the Inter-American system has been going through quite a severe crisis over the last few years, political crisis, the system as a whole, with particular threats to the human rights pillars, the court and the commission. And I wanted to ask you how that's affected your mandate and in the extension children's rights in the region.
Yes, we can take these questions first.
Well, I would like to mention, after hearing you both, that the Committee on the Rights of the Child is writing the general observation about Article 4, that it is important to participate. And this has to do with two big problems everywhere. The data collection, that if you don't have data, you cannot have policies, and you cannot have budget, and you cannot evaluate your work. So the data collection and the budget is so important. That's why this general observation is important to support in any way. And the second information is about the general day of discussion this year, which is about media. The media has a very important role, for good and for bad, is happening with the children in the world. And it's important how to deal with that, because freedom of expression is a sagrado principio, sacred principle, but when it has to do with children, there's a limit, as any other right. And it's important to understand how to deal with that limits with such sacred right. That sometimes create an atmosphere in the society that the adolescents are dangerous or criminalized adolescents, and that lead to some leaders to implement legislations to reduce the age of responsibility, penal responsibility, or to increase the condemn to adolescents. And the idea that the most principal problems of security has to do with young people. And when you see the most difficult crimes or most horrible crimes, like homicides or others, 10% are committed by adolescents and young people. But if you read the newspapers, those crimes are news. So the society understands that the problem is there. And that's why it's important how to deal with the media and also with the new technologies that are very good for children and adolescents, but has also some dangers. And parents not always understand where the dangers are, and it's important to have public policies on this too. When you mention the no repetition measures, when in the recommendations or in the sanctions, not only the monetary reparation, but measures for the no repetition of this violation. As we are 7 members in the commission, and I was the only not lawyer. And now I have another. The Brazilian one is not lawyer either. And I always look at the recommendations because the lawyers they don't know very well about how things function outside the legislation. So for me it's very important to see what we are asking for no repetition. And it's important to have a research if it is Colombia, if it is, or here in Sweden, a local government, a local level, see what's happening there and what needs to be happening. For this measure be assertive at that moment. The interaction with African commissions on human rights, it's good when we don't have a very close relation, but only because of lack of funds. But the link Sur-Sur is growing. And Brazil has a leadership on this, because Brazil is very close to Africa. So in the Mercosur, we are working with Mercosur for this Sur-Sur system, regional system, to work together. Because many times, not only in Africa, also in Latin America, the authorities says, come on, these human rights are for Europe, not for us. But if you see that other countries like Africa, in Latin America, could have good experiences, and on the other side, the same. If you can see in Africa good practices, it's easier to accept and to grow on the implementation of human rights. It's easier than comparing Paraguay with Sweden. It's much easier to, in any way, in the culture, in economic way. And then, the crisis. Yes. I can see that in the universal system on human rights, when I was in the committee, we already heard complaints of the states of why we made this recommendation. When states are ashamed, when publicly the committee pone el dedo en la llaga.
Put the finger in the wound, so to speak.
And of course they prefer this not happen. But it's normal. It's normal, these complaints. Well, the same thing, but the states are closer to the Inter-American Commission because the reality obliges them to deal with the committee or the commission the whole time. It's not every 5-8 years. The whole time they have medidas cautelares, precautionary measures. one petition obliged them to have many, many interventions in many things. The letters we write, the reports we write, the visits we make, the press release we write, they're always, so when the progressive or left-wing governments were increasing in the region, we could have waited that they will grow in terms of human rights. But this didn't happen. I don't know why, but it was like now they are in the government and they know what they have to do, and nobody will tell them what to do. And even when it was in terms of human rights, they were not, they didn't understand how the system worked. And in one moment, which is normal that these things happen, because they prefer not to have problems, but the problems exist and they have to deal with an institution that is for that. Because if they had everything done at local level and national level, the problems wouldn't arrive in the other level. But when the dictatorships and were there, all these people were working on human rights, or were demanding their rights. But when they were in the government, these things changed. And it was difficult to understand, but this happened. And they were many, not they were isolated. And it happened when just the president of Brazil, the actual president, arrived, that Brazil received a precautionary measure, which was a difficult one, because 4,000 people, indigenous people, claiming, porque una represa de agua, dam, a big, like Brazil do always big things, big dam was going to expulse, and they needed their rights to be respected. They needed to be consulted, and they needed to apply this 169 convention of the ILO, the consultation process, and all these things didn't happen. So they asked for a precautionary measure. And the Commission gave the precautionary measure. The precautionary measure means, please stop and take care of these rights. And we started a discussion with them. But this new president adopted a decision to claim very hardly against the Commission, and took the ambassador and took the money, that $800,000 for the Commission. Until now, they don't have ambassador. And Brazil is Brazil. And a lot of other countries went, not because they had the same problem as Brazil, because we could discuss if this measure was well taken or not, everything. I don't say that it was perfect. Perhaps we had to take some other steps before, or we had to ensure that they understand the measure and things like that. But this initiated a process of discussion about the system. And most of the countries said, the Commission was very important, always it's very important, but especially during the dictatorship. But now we are not dictatorship. We are democratic, we don't need those kind of tools, we must change. So it was a process very difficult, more than 1 year of discussion at all levels in all the region. And the civil society, very strong, Now, looking back, you see, it was a good result on dissemination of what the system is, because it was discussed, it was written in the newspapers, and it was the problem. And finally, after 1 year, we have changed some things in our regulations that answered what the states demand on us, to have more time to answer our questions, to be advised before the precautionary measure is adopted. We decided to do that unless it is absolutely urgent and we cannot wait. But we will try, and this is what we adopted. And civil society was not very happy because they always want to pressure with more effort to the states, because the state, if you don't push, don't move. No? So for the civil society, they prefer the Commission to be strong and defended. We defended as much as we could. We wouldn't die in that defense. And we really didn't know if we were dying or not, because everything could happen. Even all the OAS has a demand on many countries with reason. You see always reason in both parts. Because when they see Canada and the United States don't recognize the court decisions that oblige the states. But the United States and Canada pay for the system to do that to other countries. Of course, it's something that they legitimate the system. But the other countries don't give budget to the system. And they don't want the system to be to receive the money only from Canada and the States, and not from Europe either. But they don't give the money, so they want to kill the system. There's all these discussions. Finally, we have changed, they have changed, they have decided to give more money, and we keep the dialogue as much as we can. They said that we were autistas, that we didn't hear what they say, so we decided every time we have session, we have a meeting with the state, and we hear and listen to what they have to say, which is a way of having them participating and discussing things. I think the result was good. 1 year ago, we were like that, very worried. What was going to be the end? Some countries like Venezuela and Ecuador didn't like the final decisions of the states and the Commission, and they push, and they still push to suspend the medidas cautelares, precautionary measures. They said that we are not allowed to have that. And I can't remember at this moment one. And the other thing that they claim is that we shouldn't be in the United States, in Washington, because the United States has not ratified the convention, so doesn't accept. But the Commission, yes, is accepted by the United States. It's the court that is not accepted. But anyway, we are trying to work more with United States in their problems, visiting, for instance, detention centers with adolescents and problems, big problems they have, in order, well, because that's our duty, first of all, and we are there in Washington, and so we are trying, and it's important for them to be in the system.
Thank you, Rosa Maria, and I'm sorry to
interrupt
you because we have to wrap things up. I think we have been listening to a lot of interesting suggestions and also concrete suggestions. And what we have, in a sense, been hearing is also that we are, in a sense, going back to a traditional position towards children's rights, as seeing them as some sort of top-bottom perspective, that it's the legislators and the decision makers that is deciding these issues, and not the opposite, and cutting thus the participation of the children. And a clear example of this is the non-possibility of children to have access to the complaint procedures, which is the case in Sweden, as has been heard here before. So it's quite a traditional and not modern vision of children's rights that we are living today. And also it was interesting to hear about the experience of economic, social and cultural rights, that you have created a new rapporteurship in the Inter-American Commission, and taking a more holistic approach and relying on the interdependence of the rights that is also, in a sense, sometimes forgotten, that it's a set of rights, not only some particular small rights. So thank you a lot for your participation, Rosa Maria. You will be heading to another conference now. Thank you, Hanna. Thank you, Karin. And thank you to you, the audience. We have a small, humble gift for you, Rosa Maria.
Thank you.
We didn't want to have too big.
Dessert. Thank you very much.